All right, guys, we're going to continue on with this whole concept of fostering a safety culture. And we're moving on to the second section of the textbook regarding this chapter. But again, I'm going to start off with an incident. And I kind of want to read you something that's actually happened in a lab and what can we learn and take away from it. So a new employee was working in the laboratory that required preparation of formalin. She prepared a small carboy, which is basically a large plastic jug, with this solution in a deep sink in the lab, but spilled some of the solution. She did not clean up the spill, but left a few minutes later. Shortly after, another employee who had worked in the laboratory for many years arrived and began doing her work. After a short time, she developed a cough, and it became more severe. She began having trouble breathing. She exited from the laboratory and called for help. Her colleagues took her to the workplace clinic. She was put on oxygen and transported to the hospital. She later recovered, but discovered that she was allergic to formaldehyde or formalin and could no longer do work in the laboratory. So let's talk about what we can learn from this incident, right? So here we have a new employee, a brand new employee that just started the company. Who knows, maybe that week, maybe that day, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, but we've got a new employee that was working in a lab and they were probably following directions. It required the preparation of formalin. So what they were doing was okay. They were following the standard operating procedure known as the SOP in the lab. They were reading the directions, they were following the directions, and they were preparing the solution. She thought she was being safe because it says she prepared the carboy in a deep sink in the lab. So she maybe had the idea that it could spill and she didn't want to cause a mess. So she took this plastic huge jug over to the sink, put it down into the sink to make the solution and to fill the carboy up. So kudos to her for thinking safety in a laboratory, right? But she spilled some of the solution. Now, it doesn't really say where she spilled the solution. It could have been in the sink. It could have been on a nearby lab or a countertop, but she at least spilled some. The problem here is that if she recognized she spilled some, she probably would have cleaned it up because, after all, she's taking the maybe initiative to prepare this thing in the sink, okay? So she probably had no clue that she spilt some of the solution, which is okay, right? Things happen in a laboratory, and sometimes these things can get by us, and we have no clue that they're happening. So after she made the solution, she left. Bottom line, she left because she had no clue that it had spilled. Shortly after, another employee who had worked in the lab for many years arrived and began doing her work. So here we have maybe a longer-term employee that had worked in this lab for many years, has no problems up until this point, and then the day that she comes in, she develops a cough, and then it's basically like an allergic reaction. So she had to be sent to the workplace clinic and then later to the hospital. So for years on end, she worked in this lab with no problems. And then on this day, with a new employee making the solution, spill a little bit of it on the countertop or in the sink, all of a sudden this long-term employee was exposed to formalin, something that hadn't happened before in the past, and she realizes that she has an allergic reaction to it. So part of the story is it doesn't matter how long you've worked with a company. Something can happen, right? And if they had worked with formalin and if they had prepared formalin for many, many years or many, many months and there were no problems, it's because there were no spills that happened in the lab. But years after the fact, we now have an allergic reaction to formalin, and she could not do work in the laboratory anymore. So this shows you kind of the case of a new employee trying to think about safety and doing the right thing, but making a mistake, and then a long-term employee taking things for granted, and then all of a sudden we get an allergic reaction to a compound or a chemical that they had probably been exposed to for years on end. They just didn't come in physical contact with the chemical through the spill. So that's the incident that we want to talk about, and those are the things that we need to learn. Something else that I would like to mention is that many of these large industrial places do have a workplace clinic. So if something happens, let's say you cut yourself or you get a reaction to a chemical like this lady, they do send you to the workplace clinic and let the workplace doctors and nurses take a look at you. You see the same kind of thing in a way at big major universities. Very often they will have a doctor's office or a clinic on campus for students that need to see one kind of immediately without going and getting a doctor's visit or going to the hospital. So it looked like it was so bad that she was later transported to the hospital, but this basically shows you that industry is thinking about your safety and putting your health first by bringing in these clinics on the workplace and paying these doctors and nurses to take care of you if something happens. All right. Something else that I want to say is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is an organic solvent. So we often say that organic solvents are very flammable. Organic solvents are health hazards if you're going to work with them. They probably are going to be health hazards. Not every one of them, but a lot of them are. And formaldehyde falls into that category. That is a carbon-based compound that has hydrogens and oxygens in it, but that's about it. But it is carbon-based, therefore it is organic in nature. So here we get basically an allergy that's going to prevent this woman from working in the laboratory from here on out. All right, so we need to move on, and we need to talk about certain things that are taking place in a laboratory, and these are incidents, right? I really want to focus on incidents this time, and industry has always had incidents. There's always been things that have happened with an employer. It might not be a laboratory employer, but it's at least an employer. If you go back and look at the book called The Jungle, you're going to see cases detailed in the meat packing industry. And these employees were basically losing their fingers, and they were falling into the vats of acids and bases that this meat packing industry had. And they were getting dissolved up and processed in the meat, or their fingers would get chopped off and processed in the meat, and then that would be sold to people that would then eventually eat it. So we always see incidents that happen. It's not just a chemical laboratory, it's not an academic lab or a chemical lab per se, but it's across the workplace. We always see these incidents. And these have been documented since the 1900s at least. We have a paper trail for some of the bigger companies. They always kind of kept track of the incidents that happened through their workers and to their workers. And we've got some detailed information about some of those. So in the early 1900s, industry had many, many incident reports. It was just something that was very common. So the problem here is that we learned as we go. So when an incident happened, what they decided to do is fix the situation and prevent that from happening again. So we started to get safety measures implemented into a laboratory curriculum or a laboratory environment. So if something went wrong, we would document it. We would kind of figure out why did it go wrong, and then we would go back and fix that problem to make sure that that incident did not happen again. Now, these incidents also led to lawsuits. And back in the day, we had a company that was similar to GE, and they were producing a product. And that product was very similar to saran wrap that you would use in today's kitchen, right? It was almost like a stretchy, thin plastic material, and that plastic material was made with organics. And one of those organics was benzene. Benzene is a common organic solvent, at least it was back in the day, and this solvent was used in the processing of this plastic that would then be basically rolled up and sold to consumers. This benzene product, there wasn't a lot known about it during the time, and the company basically exposed their workers to benzene and benzene-related solvents every day, all day, through the manufacturing process. No one knew really any better at the time. The problem now is that we know that benzene is a highly carcinogenic compound. This stuff causes cancer, and it causes cancer quick. So when these employees began using and working with benzene, those that had been on the workplace for years and years and years began to get cancer. Things like leukemia, tumors on their kidneys, tumors on their liver, tumors on their lungs. They were basically, in a roundabout way, dying left and right. The problem here is that it also began happening with the newly hired employees as well. So in the beginning, some of the long-term employees, they just thought that maybe exposure in this environment was giving it to them. Not one thing, but over the course of their lifetime while they had worked for this company, this exposure to many different things was showing higher levels of cancer in these employees. The problem is that when new employees started to get this too, they had to kind of look closer at the product and the production line and try to figure out what changes did they make recently that would cause these things to go haywire. And benzene was the culprit. So huge lawsuits happened. Companies can be fined. Companies do have to pay out when it's their fault and they knew better. And this is just one of those incidents that happened. So companies realized that safety meant money, right? There was an investment that had to be made. But the money that they invested in safety could be saved from the lawsuits that these companies would get. So bottom line, these companies made the decision to start investing in safety programs and safety departments in their workplace. So all of a sudden, you start to see things like an environmental health and safety departments getting creeped up in these workplaces, especially in laboratory environments. So environmental health and safety. So if you go through this program and you like working in a laboratory, but maybe it's not something that you could see yourself doing every day for the rest of your life, there's other related departments that go along with a lab, and the EHS is one of those. So you could be sitting in an office, you could be going around and touring lab facilities or lab spaces and trying to think about how to improve the safety culture of a laboratory. That's the purpose of them, and that's why they're hired. So companies made investments into safety programs, all to save money in the long run against the lawsuits that might come their way a little bit later on. So what they like to say is that employees are partners in the safety. They want you to play an active role. That's bottom line what they want, right? And we've already kind of discussed this over and over and over. You as an employee, or you as a student really, should be a partner in safety, and you should play an active role and say, listen, I think we should wear our goggles today, or I'm going to wear my goggles even though they didn't specifically tell me to today. So those are the things that you need to take the initiative of, both with us and with the future employee. The goal is to keep the company or the overall lab safe. That's what we're after, right? We want you to be safe, we want our lab to be safe, and we want other people to be safe as well. And you playing an active role will help that. So bottom line, employees sometimes will help develop safety measures. They will bring you in and they will say, listen, if you don't like the way certain things are done, let's implement a new way to do them, and let's make sure that we do not have an incident in the future. Not only will you develop them, but you will help implement them. So they will come along and they will say, I think that we've created this new safety procedure. What's the best way to implement this for every lab worker in the lab? What's your opinions? What's your thoughts? Because you are the ones that's going to have to be exposed to these things. And they want your opinion directly from the horse's mouth about what's best and what's not. And of course, they want you to follow current policy. So all of the policy that's in place right now, they want you to follow that. And with these new additions, they want you to adapt those and they want you to follow the new ones as well. On the other side, we're all thinking about safety here. They also want their employees to report unsafe conditions, right? If the management team and if the leaders of the company do not realize that we have an unsafe environment because they're not working in there with you, right? You're in there on your own. You're in there with your other coworkers. But if the people that are not working in the lab, if they have no clue about what's going on, they're not going to take steps in order to fix it and make sure the safety is the number one priority or concern, right? So if you see something that's unsafe in the laboratory, all of these members of management would love to know your advice and would love to know your opinion, and you just simply need to reach out to them. They're not going to fire you because you spoke your mind, but they are probably going to wise up and say, hey, you're putting other people first, and we appreciate that. So thank you for letting us know, and we will make these steps to alleviate this safety hazard or this problem that we're seeing or that you're seeing. Okay? All right. So here's the thing, people. When you get a job, chances are you will not know all of the safety precautions or safety policies of a company, right? That's just the way that it is. When you get hired, it's a brand new lab environment with brand new people, brand new leaders, brand new managers, brand new policies. And you will not know what those policies are. But your employer will expect you to adapt to their policy. Now, I'm going to underscore that because if you worked for another laboratory and you're going to a new employer, that new employer will do things differently. They will process samples differently. They will have different standard operating procedures or directions for you to follow, and their safety measures will be different as well. So that's why I'm saying their safety procedures. Leave the old behind, adapt to the new. That's your job, and that's part of the requirements. Because of that, they will very often have training programs for you. Right? All of this is creating a safety culture. All of this is creating or fostering a very safe environment. So before they turn you loose in a lab, full-blown steam, just say, go do this, here's your SOPs, now go do it. They're going to probably send you through a training protocol. And the training could last for a week. It could last for 4 weeks, depending on the company that you work for. And part of this training will be safety, right? They want you to understand how to be safe, what you should do, what you should not do in a lab, and they're not going to let you go in there blinded. Now, the good news is that you'll get paid for it. This is time that you are dedicating to the employer and to your job, so you will get paid for the hours of the training program that you're putting into it. However, keep in mind and have comfort knowing that these companies will bring you in and they will give you the training that you need before they turn you loose and let you do whatever you want to do. All right. Why do they do this? Well, bad press, meaning like an accident or an incident, leads to bad reputation. And bad reputation will lower the number of clients that seek their service. It will lower the number of samples that they process, and it will lower the amount of money that these companies make, right? And here's the kicker, people. If the company sees a dip in money, this money pays you, right? And if the company did not make money, you would not get a paycheck. So I want you to keep that in mind when you actually get a job or when you go into a lab environment. Whenever you talk about these big companies or corporations that are making tons of money, they have to make tons of money, because if it wasn't for that, you would not receive a paycheck. So if you are in the laboratory and if you're working and if you're not safe and an incident happens and they have to report it, and let's say something blows up, and let's say that 3 or 4 people were injured or maybe even killed in the lab, that turns around to be bad press. That bad press is going to spread like wildfire, and that bad press could lead to a dip in the money that the company makes. If they take a dip in the money or the profits of the company, all of a sudden, they're going to start looking at their employees. How many people do we have hired? Do we need to go through layoffs? Because we need to pick up the pace, and until we start getting more and more samples and more clients coming to use our service, we cannot pay our employees or hire any more people. So you are directly related to your paycheck, believe it or not, right? And that happens for any company, not just the laboratory environment, but any company that you work for. You have to understand the full circle here, right? Put yourself in the owner of the corporation's shoes. What would happen if it happened to you? If you owned a lab and that lab had an explosion, and that explosion costed you millions of dollars in money that you're no longer getting, well, what's going to happen? You're going to start laying people off. You're going to have to start not giving people pay raises. You're going to have to kind of reformulate all of your extra help to try to figure out how you can get through this moment in time, right? So bad reputation, loss of money, no jobs. You are directly related to your paycheck. So, can you look at safety records? Well, yeah, you can. You can look at safety records of any company. Very often, these are made public, especially if they're a pretty nasty or bad incident that begins to happen. But you can do your research. You can type in the company's name. You can type in the location's name. You can go through Google, pull up any kind of article that you might see out there. And there's also a couple of different links that you can visit that will give you incident reports on companies throughout the United States. And those links I will make available through Blackboard. Okay, the links, they're actually going to be found in the PowerPoint that you probably will not have access to at this moment in time, but it will look like these 2 links here. So faxonline.nl and ehs.uscb.edu/lab-safety/laboratory-accidents. I think one of these links will focus on research and academics, and the other one will focus on actual industry that you will have as well. All right. So that's where you can find some of this information. Do your homework. Make sure that you're going into a safe environment. And when you get there with an employee, don't be afraid to ask about safety precautions, right? You can be very inquisitive. You don't have to interrogate them, but you can be very inquisitive about this process and, just general kind of statements to give yourself a better peace of mind. So that's basically the working world, right? That's how jobs and that's how employees operate, and that's how you should operate as well. So in the next video, we'll come back. We'll talk about a couple of more topics about how to appropriately bring these safety concerns up to your employer.